The most important part of making a good bone broth, meat stock, whatever, both, either or, is that you have more carcass than you do water. And I don't know, I guess technically that's not really the truth, but that's the thing, is the balance has to be more carcass. So I've got a typical 5-quart crock pot, which is great. And for that, I'll use usually like 3 rotisserie birds. So normally a rotisserie bird is not going to be that big. But in general, I try and make sure that I have more bones in there than I do water. If I wanted to make just a very simple stock and I only had 1 bird, I would still do it because the value is still good there. But typically, this is what I follow. I'd say about 3 birds to 5 into that, 5-quart. And then I just cover the top with turmeric, and then I'll cover the top with salt, and then maybe I'll cover the top with garlic. So that's one option. And I'm talking about powders in this case. And I like to do that. So sometimes after you've been roasting a carcass for a while, you could smell some impurities cooking off, and that would make the bone broth smell not so nice. In that case, I usually add more of those 3 ingredients, because then that will further help to extract, cook off, burn off those impurities and things that we actually don't want in the final product. And that's the best thing about using dried spices, in my opinion, is you can throw them in anytime, in the beginning, in the end, whenever. Those would be my go-tos. That's going to be the simplest because you can set it, forget it, no problem. And anytime I smell that, like I said, I run over, throw more. So the next thing, I guess, is that typically you make a meat stock which you cook off the carcass for a day. And then usually they say that's like the meat stock. You don't actually get bone broth until you've thoroughly cooked through the bone and the bones are brittle and falling apart, and then you've extracted a lot of the nutrients, the minerals, the things that are inside the bones that are really good in the bone broth that make it the bone broth. There's nutritional value to both of them, definitely. And so you could definitely leave the meat in there. You could pick off the meat later after a day or so. It's going to be really dry, though. That's why I usually don't. So usually the meat that I toss into our crock pot, is meat that I don't want to use for other things. So making the really gelatinous stuff, it's just very important to have more bones than you have water, basically. And if you've got a big stock pot that you put on the stove to make yours, then what I usually do is try and fill up with bones and carcass stuff, meat and cartilage that I don't want, to the point of maybe a half. And then I'll just cover that in water to about 3/4 of the size of the stock pot. And then repeat spices as I just mentioned. So I'll throw this stuff in the description to make it easier for you, of course. But other than that, there's other methods. There's traditional herbs that you can throw on there. There's whole herbs you can throw on there, which also make it great. I like to use the herbs as a final finish for when I actually make the soup, because I think certain herbs, when they're fresh and you throw them in at the final serving, is going to add the most flavor. But if you wanted to just extract the things from the herbs, then they usually suggest the last 4 hours is going to be the optimal time to really extract from the herbs. And, the typical poultry seasonings are going to be like sage, thyme, and rosemary. Those are the top 3. We have also done turkey bones mixed with chicken bones, mixed with beef bones, and a lot of your meat departments will have hocks, big chunks of bones that you can use. And I'm not talking about dog bones. There should be bones with marrow that you could use And in some of these cases, they're sawed into quarters and stuff. And you don't have to necessarily use the ratios that I did in that situation, but you could still use the same herbs and etc. So yeah, the last 4 hours would also be the most optimal time to throw in things like celery, carrots, onions, garlic, and that kind of stuff. Those are the go-tos that I usually make when I make my bone broth.